Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. This is the third class in our series on various issues with using and making the most of generative AI tools for freelancers. Now, we have a lot of ground to cover. I'm not going to do a lot of chit-chat here to get started. Let's just go ahead and launch right in. Now, some of you will remember that we had a couple of classes earlier, not earlier this year, late last year. This is the third class in that series. We started off with an introduction to AI as our first class, and then a tour through doing a number of freelance tools a number of freelance tasks with AI tools that a typical freelancer might face during his or her workday. Today, we're going to dive more deeply into various legal and ethical issues which may come up in the course of doing our work. And I want to give you the ability to spot them in advance, know what they are, know what they entail, what we can do about it, and what the risks are if we just ignore them and hope that they go away. Because like any other problem, they're not going to go away on their own. If we are proactive about it, we are in the best possible position to make sure that they don't impact us, our clients, or our work. Okay, now a little bit of background on me. I went over this in more depth during our previous classes. I am a freelance writer. I've been doing technical writing work for all my career about, well, I don't want to sound ancient, but I've been doing this since the early 1990s. And I've split my time between being a staff writer and being a freelancer. I've been a freelancer now for about 15 years. And starting last year, I was getting questions from clients on, are you using AI? Now, my specialty niche, I've got a couple of them. I work fairly scientific documentation in the environmental sciences realm. I've been focusing on renewable energy, but I also cover things like sustainable and organic agriculture. I have also done stints in software programming and in the other physical sciences. So when AI came up and I started getting questions from clients, I actually dove into it and started to learn about it. About May of last year, the tide kind of changed for me personally. Prior to that, my clients had said, well, we've been hearing about this AI, don't use it. If you use it, we're going to just drop you. We're not going to continue to work with you anymore. So if we find out that you're using it, you're done. And I thought, okay, that's pretty clear. Then in May of last year, I had a client approach me saying, okay, we've got this project. We want you to work on it. We are under budget and behind schedule, and we really need to get this moving. So we want you to use as much AI as you possibly can. That was kind of my launching point for, I need to learn as much as I can, as fast as I can. And what I'll be sharing with you today is an overview of the legal and ethical issues I've learned along the line, especially as they relate to discussing things with your clients, because frankly, you are going to be the expert in the room for a while. A lot of clients have heard about AI. They don't know much about AI. They're going to be asking you to do things with AI. You will need to know what you can and cannot do. You will also occasionally be in a position of hearing that they want you to use it in a certain way that, thanks to this training, you're going to know right away is not a very good idea. So you will be in a position of knowing whether to accept new assignments or negotiate for different terms or turn them down entirely because of the AI risks that they pose. Okay, these are all of the different topics we're going to cover today. Now, I'm not going to go into depth on any one of these. There's just too much ground to cover. What I am going to do is give you an overview of what's involved and then some examples so that you'll have a taste of what to look for and the shape it may take and what the problems are, and you can make educated decisions about that from that point forward. You will have access to this PowerPoint after the class. So I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly. You will have this PowerPoint to reference after we're done. Okay, let's get started with some of the basic pieces of information here. Now, starting off, any given party in a freelancing arrangement is going to be focused on something other than AI for their relationship. The client just wants to receive written content on time, on budget. The client may or may not understand anything regarding AI. They may have heard that it solves all their problems. They may have heard that it is going to create problems. Their knowledge is going to be all over the board. So you cannot rely on the client knowing what AI can and cannot do. Similarly, the client's end user just wants accurate information on time, as advertised, catered and curated for the audience that it's going to serve. The end user is not going to take the time to double check content for accuracy or appropriateness. The only time you're going to hear from the client is under two scenarios. It served its purpose or it didn't. If the client finds out that you were using AI and if that AI generated materials that do not work for any reason, you're going to hear about it. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is helping to make sure that that doesn't happen. The writer, namely you and I, we just want to do our job and get paid. We like writing. We like producing these documents that solve a problem for our client. We may or may not really want to mess with AI. This is going to be one of those cases where we're going to have to really get ready to use this tool one way or the other, because just in terms of efficiency, it can make our jobs easier, but we don't want to be so casual with it or so careless with it that we create problems. If AI is used poorly and without respect for the risks I'm going to talk about, the resulting content can cause problems for all of us, for ourselves, for our clients' end users. The critical thing we need to know, if you remember nothing else from this class, in a scenario where AI content is problematic for anybody, the freelancer can be held personally liable, because the client will not want to take the responsibility. The customer certainly won't want to take the responsibility, and the freelancer is left holding the bag. So even if you don't want to learn about AI, you have a business reason compelling you to at least figure out how to protect yourself. And the baseline for this is, when everything else is said and done, fact check, and fact check again. The content that goes out the door under your name has got to be watertight, because nobody's going to check it after you. You cannot rely on that. You have to be the fact checker so that you know the stuff you put your name on is rock solid. Okay, so let's move on with the details. Okay, copyright infringement is one of the big hitters already. And the reason for that is because of how AI was created. If you recall from our previous classes, AI is a very specialized set of computer programs and platforms, and it was essentially trained on all published material up to this date. But when we really look at, you look below the surface of that, what does that mean? That means that every published piece of content, including copyrighted information, was used to train AI. And in response, AI is going to fall back on that to create new content. So if you ask AI to generate some piece of content with the prompt that you write, it's going to reference what it was trained on. If the materials it's trained on was copyrighted, it's going to go ahead and use it anyway, because it doesn't know not to. Okay, so wrap your brain around that for a minute. If the BBC or the New York Times or any other news organization had their websites scraped for content to train AI, those articles are now in AI's collective memory. And AI is going to use that to create the content that you've asked for. Same thing with published books, same things with published imagery. So when we generate content, we have got to review it and see if there's anything that resembles copyrighted information or has characteristics of copyrighted infringement. And you might think, how in the world would I know? I haven't read every book on the planet. Okay, one way to know is if it's providing exact quotes from exact people. Where did it get those quotes? That's copyrighted information. Okay, where did it get exact dates? Where did it get first user accounts? Things that you would expect to find in, for instance, an interview with a human being. If that's in the content that you just got from AI, that's probably copyrighted because somebody got it at some point. Or it's a hallucination, which means that AI made it up out of thin air. Either way, you probably can't use it. If there's any doubt, do a normal Google search or search engine search on that exact phrase and see if it comes up from another source. If it does, you can't use it with the way that it's currently written. Summarize it, attribute it, or both. Okay. Now, I originally wrote this class for a United States audience. I know that a lot of folks here are a European audience, so I've spent the last month or so getting caught up on European law. I can tell you that the EU is further along in that regard than the United States. You recently enacted the EU AI Act, which is actually fairly sophisticated. I was pleased to see that. It went into effect in mid to late 2024, but it's not yet being enforced. That is going off, or that's being held off until August of 2026. That being said, the US is even further behind. But what's happening here is current laws are being used to cover AI while we get a federal framework in place. So just because we don't have specific copyright law applicable to AI here, we still have lawsuits moving through the courts suing AI companies for copyright infringement. So let's look at a few of the cases where that has already occurred. As I already mentioned, an AI company might scrape news articles from behind a paywall, then use that material to train their AI algorithms. Alternately, an AI tool might generate a blog post that unintentionally mirrors a published article that's already protected by copyright. A third example would be writers using AI for content creation who unknowingly incorporate copyrighted phrases or ideas. A related lawsuit, and there's many, Fowler versus Perlmutter 2023. One case that I just read about that was partially ruled on last week was Thomson Reuters, which is the news organization, against an AI company called Ross Intelligence, where Ross Intelligence had used Reuters news articles to train their AI. Reuters sued. A U.S. District Court judge just ruled in Reuters' favor. So AI companies are being held liable. That's at the training level where freelancers were not involved. If a freelancer had gathered content based on a Reuters article and then used that for a paid product, the freelancer would have been included in that, probably would have been included in that ruling. That's an example of copyright infringement. Okay, trademark infringement is similar. Instead of copyrighted written content, trademark infringement is, for instance, if you deliberately or accidentally steal a company's trademarked terms, brand, phrases like slogans, or logos, other imagery that is copyright or that is trademark protected. Now, AI, ironically, can be used in detecting and preventing trademark issues, but AI content generators like us still need to learn how to recognize when a trademark might be getting infringed upon. And the advice here is that when in doubt, don't. Because if it looks to you like it could be trademarked, that's enough reason to change your text, change your image, or find a way to work around it, because you don't want to get sucked down into this either. So examples would be An AI tool generates an advertisement. For instance, say a marketing brochure containing a competitor's trademark. Say you're comparing two different brands. That, if it was found by the competitor, would be grounds for a lawsuit, potentially on trademark grounds. Say an automated product description created by AI includes a well-known brand name. Again, for instance, a comparison between your product and somebody else's, that could be a trademark infringement. Or you use AI to write promotional copy that inadvertently references a trademarked slogan or a product name or image. The usual time it comes up is if your client is comparing their product to somebody else. That's where you really need to tread carefully. And in this case, the EU's AI Act, I don't recall if it speaks specifically to this issue. If it does, it's on one of the lower tiers of the risk assessment, but it is still upon us to look for that and watch for it and change our materials when needed. Okay, another category: false or misleading information, deep fakes, and fake news. We are already just inundated with deep fakes and fake news. Over here, we had a lot of problems with that during our presidential election. I know that you folks are having problems over there as well. AI can generate perfectly good content, and it looks perfectly plausible, and it still has misleading information. It can accidentally generate fake news where it just hallucinates fake information, or it can be used deliberately to create deep fakes. It's getting harder and harder to track where that's the case. Our best guidance here is human oversight and looking at ethical guidelines and rigorous fact-checking. I spent some time both as a staff journalist and as a freelance reporter well before AI came up, and fact-checking was our religion. If we can't prove it, it doesn't go out the door. That is our single best defense against accidental or deliberate fake news. So for instance, let's say an AI tool generates a news article for a freelance journalist that contains several inaccuracies. That would reflect poorly on us regardless. Well, it would reflect poorly on us and whoever is publishing our work, but the liability would come down to us. Or for instance, an AI-generated ad includes misleading claims, even by accident, resulting in consumer backlash. Even if there's no lawsuit, the client could lose a lot of credibility, and that could cost us our job, and that could cost them a lot of income. Now, there is certainly a criminal element out there using AI to create deepfakes, to create inaccurate information, and they are now, I didn't put this in here because I've just now been reading about it, they are stealing legitimate bylines to generate false articles. And what I mean by that is, let's say they found my byline attached to some of my old articles, and then they went out and they generated something completely new, and they put my byline on it, and they published it in some new place. Who do you think is going to be held liable for that? I would have to prove that that was something I didn't write. In some jurisdictions, theoretically innocent until proven guilty, but because of the way this is laid out, sometimes the freelancer has to prove that they didn't do it. Another weird way that this comes up is, and you can test this for yourself, go out to any AI search engine, or not search engine, AI content generator, and type in, who is such and such married to? When you know the answer already, I can almost guarantee you that whoever the name is that comes back is going to be wrong. One of the current weaknesses of AI is that there are so many people who have the same name that it's going to pick that person, another person's spouse, as being married to the person you have in mind. So when we do our research for articles, when we ask it specific text or specific specific questions like that, we've got to fact check, because even accidentally, that can introduce all sorts of problems. Now, again, in breaking news, the BBC just released a detailed report on so-called news summaries, AI-generated news summaries. They found some staggering error rates. 51% of the articles had factual errors. These factual errors included misquotes from people who exist, quotes from people who don't exist, and other factual errors like dates, locations, events, so on and so forth. Now, this should have been easy, low-hanging fruit for the AI engines that were being used in this study. There were 4 different AI engines used in their study, and you can go back to the BBC and read all about it. I will have a link for you after the class. The BBC granted these AI engines access to BBC News articles. Free access, well, I don't know if it was free, but they didn't have to work very hard to get it. Even with that easy access, AI still screwed up a lot of the information, to where the BBC is now mulling how they can prevent that in the future because it was so unreliable. So it is not once in a while. It's a lot. It's, say, 1/4 to 1/2 of the information coming out of news summaries has been proven to be wrong at present moment. That might improve, but for now, it's just not reliable. Okay, plagiarism. This is a big one for freelancers because there are a certain number of clients, I won't say a majority, but certainly a large fraction, who are scanning our work for plagiarism hits. And now that includes AI content generation. Because of the way AI was trained, it's almost by default plagiarism prone. So what happens is you're on assignment, you turn in your materials, and the client runs your materials through a plagiarism checker of some kind. There's many of them out there. And the plagiarism kicks off a flag that this might be plagiarized content. And the client comes back to you yelling and screaming because, okay, you apparently stole information. What do? You've got a couple options. First, you can demonstrate the research that you did to show the client that, yes, in fact, you did create your own content. If you have draft copies, that's a good first place to start. Second, that may or may not be enough. So another way to do this is more work on you, but bottom line, rework the content. Sometimes it's faster to rework it just a little bit here and there, find out from the client, or the client may already tell you this paragraph, this sentence threw up the flag. You know, we get our feathers ruffled when somebody accuses us of plagiarism, but let's pick our battles. The fastest way to solve this is just to rework the content and resubmit it. A lot of these plagiarism tools, the client doesn't even see them until our content goes through the plagiarism tools because it's built into the portal that we're using to submit our work. So in that instance, reworking our content might be the only way to actually submit our files. If push comes to shove, there are a lot of cases where plagiarism tools are throwing up false positives. In that case, work with your client, find out what tools they're using. You may volunteer to put your materials through a different tool, okay? But this is turning out to be the scourge of our existence right now for a lot of freelancers because they're throwing up so many false positives. And just work with it as best you can. I'm hoping that this scenario improves over time to where it's not getting as many false positives. Okay, here are a few examples, but I'm not going to get into these in depth. The main thing that is, in addition to what I've already said, if you're writing peer-reviewed content, for instance, for a peer-reviewed journal or for academics of any kind, you'll have to go a few extra steps to prove that what you're writing was not already written by somebody else. But that's where Google search can help you show that your sources did not include the content that you wrote. Okay, end user privacy concerns. This is where we as freelancers have access to, for instance, a client's data, and we're summarizing it maybe for instance, a documentary or a white paper or something like that, financial reports, which may inadvertently include end user data. So for instance, if I were, and I've actually done this, if I were a technical writer for a mortgage lending company and I was doing end year reporting for those loans that were denied, because in the States, we have to show why loans were denied. I expect the EU has something similar. I cannot include personal data, names, addresses, income, any identifying data in that report. I can only include trends. If I'm using AI in conjunction with data mining software like Power BI or Tableau, Salesforce, something like that, I have to verify that the content that I'm generating does not include end user identifying information, because that would violate privacy concerns. And again, we have slightly different rules on either side of the Atlantic. The EU is now, with their AI Act, really focusing on privacy concerns. There are 4 tiers of risk assessment with the AI Act for the EU. One of the highest risk assessment is that it's simply unacceptable risk. Privacy concerns are in that group. So that would be one of the easiest ways to run afoul of the new AI Act. Here, even though we don't have a federal statute like that yet, states are using existing privacy laws to enforce AI compliance, and that will probably remain the case until we do have a federal framework. Okay, next, bias and discrimination. Because of the way that AI is trained, namely on all of the published content to date, anything that already had bias in it was also used to train AI. So for instance, if you think about the writings of Mark Twain, he was a literary giant in American fiction, but he was also blatantly racist. All of his materials were used to train AI. That bias is now there. It is on us to review the materials that our AI tools generate for us, to check it for any form of bias and discrimination, and to get rid of that text. And when I say bias and discrimination, I'm including racial, cultural, religious, gender, ethnic, anything that you can think of. It's probably already there. So it's not a question of, will AI generate biased and discriminatory content? Of course it will, because that's what it was trained on. It's on us to look for it. It's on us to get rid of it. Okay, here's a couple of examples. AI generated job descriptions that favor specific demographics. Even now, I am personally seeing AI generated job ads that read text, like one of them I read last month, and this was no joke. I actually reported this one. Looking for 35 to 45-year-old white males. Excuse me? That violates, I don't know how many US employment rules, but there it was out there in a job posting. Okay, second example, freelance writer uses AI to create marketing copy that unintentionally includes culturally insensitive language. It's our job to review it, to refine it, so that it addresses the audience we have in mind without being discriminatory or biased in the process. Okay, same thing for AI generated lending algorithms that show bias against certain demographics. If you're writing for the financial services industry, you have got to be alert for that. Okay, there are related lawsuits here in the US. I'm sure there are in the EU. Most of them are new enough, they haven't been decided yet, but this is a big one because it is something that people will react to and clients will push back on. Okay, intellectual property rights. This is when you accidentally give away proprietary company information, typically from the company that you are working for, and they don't take kindly to that. This will come up again when you are using usually a couple of pieces of software in combination. An AI content generation tool that's already a part of some data management, customer management, contract management software, where you are surveying your company's internal information and generating content based on that. So the same thing as before, review your output for personal identifying information, company proprietary information, for instance, research that has not yet been patented. Okay. If you are in the foods industry, specific ingredients, it could be as simple as that. We don't want to give away the recipe for our product. Anything that is something that the company would want to hang on to and not make public. But it can even be something as general as they have a product that's in the wings waiting to be released. We don't want to give away product information before it's time. I actually faced this with a client last year where it was a rechargeable battery using solid state technology for the medical wearables industry. And our web hoster accidentally released several web pages of content before our marketing folks were ready for it, and it blew their plans for the product rollout. That's an example of how, the left hand doesn't always know what the right hand is doing. If it involves AI generated content and you've written that content, you can get in trouble with everybody for accidentally rolling that out too soon or rolling it out at all. Just review your materials. If it feels like something that might be something that needs to be kept under wraps, double check it. Okay, a couple of examples. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Okay, transparency and contractual violations. This is our negotiation with our client. Occasionally, it's our client's negotiation with their end user. In any case where there is a contract that people are signing, proactively make sure that you have a statement on your part of it about where you want to be regarding AI. If you don't want to use AI, if you refuse to use AI, put it in your contract. If you are currently using AI tools in any capacity, put it in your contract and say, I will continue using these until or unless I negotiate otherwise. And then it's on the client to make sure that that works for their legal department. Do not assume that the client has it in their contract, but check their contract to be sure. If they don't have it in theirs, then whatever you have in yours stands. That's a general guideline. If you have text in yours and they have text in theirs, you're going to have to make sure that those two different pieces of text for your two varying contracts are in agreement before you move forward. Do not wait for the client to bring this up because they might not have even thought of it. But since you'll be the one holding the bag, if something goes wrong, you've got to have it in your contract proactively. Okay. Now I'm trying to get a hold of some sample contract text that I have permission to use. I don't have the permission yet, so I'm waiting on that. As soon as I have that, I will make that available to you after the class. Okay, I've got a couple of examples here, but you can probably already wrap your brain around what this might include. I will provide those examples afterwards. Okay, AI in the workplace. There's two different categories of this. When AI is used to do the work that we used to do, that's one case, or when AI is used to manage employees. And what I mean by that is AI is used in the employment decision-making process. In other words, does this candidate get the job or does that candidate get the job? And then in terms of employment management over time and employment or employee dismissal reasons. We're not going to cover any of that because that's its own big topic. Today, we will talk only about when clients require or forbid that you use AI in the process of doing your job for them. And like we were just saying for contracts, that really needs to be worked out in advance. because what you might find, and what I have already seen, is if it's not specified in advance, the client can change it mid-project. And that just throws everything up into the air, because if you don't like the new terms, there's not much that you can do about it if you don't already have it in your contract. You may also get pushback if what you want to do with AI does not match what the client wants to do with AI. And again, you need to work that out in advance. The field is moving so fast that sometimes if you're on a long-term project, you'll start with no AI involved. And that client will have a change of heart mid-pace because some new tool has rolled out. Even if you have it in your contract, you might need to renegotiate at that point. Just know that there's new features coming out every day. What you start with might not be what you end with. I would encourage you to keep those lines of communication open, but also if the client comes back saying, okay, you know what, we want you to use AI for everything you do from this point forward, or if the client says, you know, I'm going to just not renew this contract with you because we're going to use AI from here on out, you are under no obligation at that point to take on the mantle of coach and educator, but I would encourage you to do so, because you will be in a position to say to the client, you know what, AI does this part really well, but AI cannot do that part. I can help you with that, and your job might change as a result, but you can position yourself to be the person using AI to accomplish the client's objectives instead of being rolled over by AI replacing your job. Let me say that in a different way. A lot of people, a lot of freelancers are afraid that AI is going to replace them in the workplace. What I see happening is writers repositioning themselves. Instead of writing the materials manually, freelance writers and staff writers are now writing the AI prompt to generate the content that the client wants. That can be a very lucrative position for the freelancer or for the staff writer, because that's a whole new skill set that not many people have yet. So consider that option if your client starts to talk to you about getting rid of your position and or changing your position. You have that ace up your sleeve. Use it if you want to. And a couple of examples of that. There aren't any related lawsuits on this that I've been able to find yet. I'm sure there will be over time. I've included at the end a list of websites that are tracking lawsuits related to AI. I would encourage you to just look through those from time to time and see what the lawsuit landscape is doing, so that you can be more prepared and more involved or more informed that way. Okay, client data privacy. And we are just past the halfway point for our class. We're almost halfway with our slides. I'm going to start trying to speed up here a little bit better so we end on time with questions, or with time for questions. Okay, data privacy. This is similar to other privacy forms, but this is more in terms of when you're handling client data as opposed to end user data. And this is very similar to proprietary information, but it's more in lines with the people involved and with some of the digital information involved as opposed to tangible products. Now, the EU came out with the General Data Protection Regulation a number of years ago. That is a data security protocol. It has now become a global standard. We're following that here in the US. So that is the go-to for guidance on what is and is not allowed and recommended. There are other cybersecurity protocols out there. I can't recommend any one of them because there are still so many that I'm not sure which one is going to be adopted going forward. But don't be surprised if you are asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement and or go through data security training if you end up working for some clients, especially in the tech world or in the highly regulated worlds of medical information, legal information, or financial services. Okay, a couple of examples there. Okay, over-reliance on AI. This is where either we turn over all of our content generation to AI or the client turns over all their content generation to AI, and what the results are. One of the results is that we as freelancers lose our skill sets. Yes, we do need to continue to practice our skill sets over time. If clients turn over their content generation to AI, they're going to completely lose control of what goes out the door. And if we are having a conversation with clients about the wisdom of turning over all content generation to AI, you can advise them on that fact. If they are adamant about turning over content generation to any of the AI tools, you can honestly and sincerely tell them that the quality of the content they're going to be putting their name on going out the door is going to plummet, and their clients, their customers, their end users will notice. It's already happening. One case that comes to mind, one of the airline companies here, and the name escapes me, I don't remember which one, decided to turn their customer service chatbot over to AI tools entirely. It was not going through human review. That AI chatbot messed up the fee structure for the airlines under the airlines. It's called the God, I think it's called the grief program or the mourning program, something about when you have to make an emergency flight because of a sick or dying family member, you get lower rates. The AI chatbot dramatically messed up that pay scheme so that it gave them way lower rates even than that special program, and it extended the window of time under which it was available. When the end user made use of that fee structure, because the chatbot included a direct link for ticketing, the airline lost hundreds of dollars with it. The airline sued the end user for lost income. The user won because the chatbot had told the user this is a valid program, and the airline was left holding the bag. That's an example of over-reliance on AI, and there's more and more examples of that coming to be. If nothing else, tell your clients if they're going to turn everything over to AI content generation, at least keep a human reviewer on staff who can check it. And that person ought to be you if you want the job, because now you know what the risks are. Okay, a few examples here. Next, environmental impacts. This one might sound like a surprise, but let's take a look at something. AI requires a lot of data. AI companies are building data centers to provide for that data. Data centers use huge amounts of energy. AI companies managing these data centers are now scrambling to find energy sources that can feed the beast. This is getting to be such a problem that the EU's Environmental Commission has now informed anybody having a data center in the European Union has to start reporting where they're getting their power from, how much power they're using, how much water they're using, because that's used to cool the data center systems, and how efficient their data centers are. Anybody doing business in the EU, even if they're not based there, for instance, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, have to meet those same criteria. Businesses are scrambling to be able to provide that energy in a way that does not make their emissions worse and is as efficient as possible. They are turning to some unusual sources like nuclear power. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and now probably others are all in negotiations with or have already reached agreements to recommission retired nuclear power plants to provide the energy they need for their data centers. A lot of consumers are really unhappy about that. If you're already against nuclear power, you're not going to like AI. The good news is those same companies are also partnering with renewable energy sources and with cutting edge energy sources like cold fusion, believe it or not. So the issue of data centers using tremendous amounts of energy is a very hot topic right now, no pun intended. Tech companies are scrambling to figure out how to do that better. They are scrambling to figure out how to make sure that their data centers are, quote unquote, good corporate citizens, good corporate facilities. But that goal is not arrived yet. So you may get pushback from clients, and or clients may get pushback from end users about using AI in any way, shape, or form until that's resolved. Okay. So a couple of examples of that. I don't know that there's litigation about that yet, but if data centers can't meet the EU's energy directives, there very well may be. That remains to be seen. Okay, compliance with industry standards. If you are working in a heavily regulated industry, we rattled off earlier, medical, legal, financial, education, anything that's already got a lot of regulatory oversight, you will need to verify that any AI generated content meets documentation standards. And this can manifest in some really interesting ways. For instance, the aerospace industry has I don't want to get into the technical weeds on this, but aerospace and air traffic control and some mechanical engineering disciplines are required to use what's called simple English, where you take a term, a sentence, a paragraph that's got a lot of technical information in it, and you literally have to dumb it down. Why? Because those materials are used by other cultures where English is a second language, and they can't be wasting their time on trying to decipher unfamiliar terms. So, for instance, air traffic control around the world uses the English language for all of their work because that was the language agreed upon, so that no matter where you fly, you know that air traffic controller is going to speak English. If the pilot of the airplane or the air traffic controller has English as a second language, imagine the confusion if they're trying to react to an emergency situation and they're trying to translate really complex language from the user's manual or from some safety manual. So AI content generation under those circumstances has to meet really tight guidelines for being simple enough that it's error proof under emergency conditions. Other industries have similar guidelines for similar reasons. So if you are in one of those industries, and if you've been in the industry for a long time and you've already done a lot of work, you already know if that applies to you or not. If you are covered by regulatory documentation regulations, AI content has to be checked to make sure it complies with those regulations. Okay, I'm really going to have to speed up now. AI risks in healthcare. This generally is when you are writing content to help patient education. You cannot write information that is not verified by medical personnel because it has bearings on, for instance, contraindications, patient outcomes, diagnoses, drug interactions, so on and so forth. If clients are on the fringe of that market, they may want to use AI to write that content. You will have to monitor the AI output to make sure that it doesn't run afoul of existing healthcare regulations, because that's a prime place where we're already seeing problems. For instance, AI had for a while, it's no longer doing this, AI tools were advocating that they could be used as companions for loneliness, except that the AI content being put out by those engines was sometimes aggravating a person's loneliness if it was accompanied by depression and or anxiety, and some suicides have resulted. Those cases are still moving through the courts, but the one that I'm familiar with found in favor of the plaintiff, which was the suicide victim's mother. She sued the AI company, and I don't remember which one it was. This is actually about a year ago, where the AI company was held liable for that. If there was a staff writer or freelance writer that was supervising that chatbot, they would have been involved in that. This is a case where the company used AI chatbot without human intervention. If you have a client encouraging you to do that or at risk of doing that, you might want to sit down and have a conversation with them about the risks. Okay, authenticity. This is a weird one. We as freelancers and even staff writers, we bring a unique human element to anything we write because we're writing it. And even if we are doing it as objectively as possible, our life experiences are going into how we craft that sentence, how we craft that phrase. And as more and more AI content gets dumped out into the internet, people are actually craving authenticity. They want to know that there's a human being there. One of the interesting ways that plagiarism is flagged as an AI content by the plagiarism engines we talked about earlier is if the grammar is too perfect, if the tempo is too regular, if the sentences are too similar in terms of length, complexity, pacing, so on and so forth. One of the things that we can do to help our clients maintain their authenticity and their branding and our own authenticity as creatives is to vary the output. So let's say that we are using content generation for a long form article, maybe a white paper or a long blog post or a report, and it sounds very monotonous because it's so regular, the sentences are all the same. We can break that up. We can rewrite, say, a quarter of those sentences, shorter, longer, simpler, more complex, vary it to make it sound more authentic. That will ring true to being authentic for the entire piece, and that will resonate better with our clients, human end users, because let's face it, clients are human beings. Their end users are human beings. If we don't connect on a human scale, we haven't done the job that they hired us to do. So even if AI content is perfect, it's probably going to sound wooden. Go ahead and mix it up a little bit so that it still feels real. And that is one of the major reasons why freelancers will probably continue to be asked to write content, even if it's augmented by AI, is because it feels human. Okay, liability for defamation. This is generally when, again, human beings are not managing the content that goes out the door, where AI content might accidentally create content, or AI engines might accidentally create content that has defamatory statements and nobody catches it on the way out. Very rarely we'll find instances where AI was used deliberately to do this, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But most of the time, defamation is accidental. If you're reviewing your materials, keep an eye out for that. Get rid of it when it pops up and you're done. It might take 30 seconds. Just be aware of it and watch for it and get rid of it when you see it, because you will. Okay, quality control. Content generation is not usually at risk of quality control unless you are under regulatory control, regulatory oversight, or you are writing quality control materials for your client. For instance, one of the projects I was on was revamping the onboarding materials and the training materials used in-house for new employees. I had to make sure that all of the levels of education were met with that department's essentially quality control cues. And this was for the software company. So when I got to the QA division, they had a number of criteria that I had to meet to make sure that my instructions to new employees met their protocols. If you are creating quality control type educational materials, generally for in-house use, just review it and make sure that it actually meets up with the department criteria that they should have already given you. If they haven't given it to you, they being the client or they being the department head for the client, ask about it. Just make sure that you're following their guidelines, and that way everybody's happy with the result. This one is a big one, fraud and impersonation. I mentioned earlier that defamation is usually done accidentally. There are times when it is done deliberately, and the image that I selected for this slide was very deliberate. During our presidential election this past year, the Trump campaign was accused of using a lot of defamatory content for their ads, where they were bad talking, trash talking other people. They also went into clearly fraudulent advertising like this image, because this is clearly Taylor Swift, and she is clearly in the image encouraging somebody to vote for Donald Trump. At the time that this image came out, she was on her Era tour, so everybody was really, really highly tuned into what she's doing next. She had not made a presidential endorsement by this time, okay? So for the Trump campaign to use this was clearly, deliberately fraudulent in a couple of different ways. First, it used her image without permission, okay? That's sin number one. Sin number two was it very directly implied that she had endorsed Trump as a candidate when she had not. Now, going back to all of our comments about where is the regulatory structure on this or that issue to date? At the time that this ad came out, ironically, Taylor Swift is based in the United States state of Tennessee. Tennessee is one of the few states that already has some AI legislation on the books, particularly about fraud. She could have gone through her state court system to file charges of fraud and or impersonation against the Trump campaign. But the legislation is so new, nobody really knew how it was going to work. Nobody knew how it was going to turn out. And instead, she did something completely different. Within 2 weeks, I believe within 2 weeks of this ad coming out, she endorsed Biden instead. That kind of nipped in the bud the whole question of how do I respond to AI fraud and impersonation. Was it the quote unquote right call? Well, nobody can say except for Taylor. She may have not wanted to mess with a lawsuit. She may not have been comfortable with the fact that it was so new and it was unproven. I'm of course not privy to her personal decision-making process, but she opted not to file lawsuit. I also don't know what the, I don't know when she loses her window of opportunity to file. She may yet do that. Bottom line, there are cases being filed about fraud and impersonation based on AI-generated imagery and or content. In this case, we had both. Those haven't been decided yet. The mechanisms for pursuing those in courts is very, very new. So be aware that it happens. It can be accidental. It can be deliberate. If you are involved with a client that wants you to get to engage in this, and they use, well, Trump did it and he got away with it, or any other candidate such and such did it and he or she got away with it, I would run as fast as possible from that client and never do business from them again. That is a train wreck waiting to happen. Okay, we've only got two more. Misleading advertising, that's kind of self-explanatory. As you can imagine by now, my advice would be don't. Journalistic integrity. This is another case where it can happen accidentally. It can happen deliberately. Most reputable news organizations are already on this. If you happen to be a freelance journalist, you probably have already had a conversation with your editor about this. If not, I would invite you to do so. Your newsroom may have just simply said, we're not going to use AI. There are some newsrooms who are experimenting with it. There are some newsrooms who are proactively partnering with AI, and that relationship is to be determined in terms of its success. Talk with your editor, see what he or she says. Just be aware that if you are using AI in the newsroom, you are going to have to be even more diligent about fact checking. Okay, recommendations. I've already beaten it into your head, but I'll do it one more time. Fact check, fact check, fact check. And be proactive on every front on this. Don't assume it's going to be correct. Don't assume it's going to be free of these various possible problems. Don't assume the client knows what the heck they're talking about. The more you educate yourself on these risks and how to avoid them and how to create content efficiently in spite of all these issues, the more successful you're going to be. You are your own best defense against getting caught up in any of these legal and ethics issues. Okay. All righty. Your resources and questions. Go ahead with questions.
Hi, Kathryn. Thanks for the talk. It's been really good. This is a question which kind of comes under this, but doesn't. It's not writing specific. I just wanted to know if you can help out. If I used an AI generation platform to create a logo for a podcast, for example, and then use that as my own podcast logo, and then generated money through that podcast, does the AI tool I used technically own the copyright for that image?
Oh, that has not yet been determined definitively. With that being said, it is trending towards the freelancer or whoever created that logo owning it. I will backpedal really fast and say this is not to be construed as legal advice. What I would suggest you do, you can proactively go trademark that through either, I don't know where you're based, but whatever national group or like the EU or the US. See if you can trademark it. Even if it was created with AI, if you go ahead and trademark it yourself, the trademark then becomes the gold-plated standard from that point forward. Because what happens behind the scenes of a trademark search is that the issuing agency will look to see if that logo already exists. And in fact, you should do this on your own before you even get it to the trademark office. If no search is found and you go through with the rest of the trademarking process, it's yours. As far as I know, it's yours. You may want to consult with legal authority on that, but everything I've read to date tells me that that would, in most cases, be yours. And the only way I can think of that I've seen is if somebody else used that same AI tool, like say we used Midjourney to create a logo, and somebody else used Midjourney to create that same logo, and they were applying for their trademark at the same time you were applying for your trademark, so neither one of them was finalized yet, and they came in, right on the wire together. That, I don't know the likelihood of that, but it's kind of about being struck by lightning. If you can get it trademarked first, 9 times out of 10, it'll be yours, no matter what anybody else says.
Awesome. All right. Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Just one comment from Steve, who's a designer, and unfortunately he had to go, but we have a comment in Slack that he'd love to see something similar for designers. Kathryn, do you have any helpful content that would work for designers? And it's not a conversation that we need to have now, but I thought that maybe some other people might be interested.
Okay, Eva, let's talk about that after the class. I may have some materials that would work for that, but I would want to refine what he means by designers. That could go in a lot of different directions.
Okay, that's a very good point. So let's start this conversation after we finish the class. But before we finish the class, are there any other questions? No, seems like okay. Well, there's been a lot of content, so I guess that's why. Kathryn, how can we find you, or how can other attendees find you?
Let's see, could I, I've got a LinkedIn profile, I've got a website. I can put both of those, either I can send them to you after the class, or I can just put them right in the chat. Would that be, which would you prefer that I do?
I think if your contact details are also on the slide deck, I will share the slide deck with everyone who has registered for the talk. So that's one, I guess, the most convenient way of sharing. And
Okay.
we also have, by the way, a great comment from George. Well, great comments from everyone. It looks like everyone has really enjoyed it. George says that it was the most detailed and comprehensive seminar he has heard on this topic. So, Kathryn,
Good.
as always, big applause to you because it has been great.
You know, I was telling somebody else that I thought when I did my first few classes that I was going to be done with AI and I can move on to other things, but it has turned into almost a compulsion to go learn more and more and more, because it is really going to impact every aspect of our lives. And I want to be in a position where I can choose how I use it and how I don't. And once I had that information, I felt compelled to share. So I will put out the word, and I might end up drowning in this later, but I'll put out the word that if questions come to mind after this class, by all means, go ahead and let me know. I'm on the Slack channel. I am trying to get into the habit of checking it more often. I have worked with past class attendees to resolve some issues they were having. That actually worked really well, and we both learned something in the process. So, you know, whatever questions folks have, just let me know, and I'll see what I can do to answer them. Let me know what topics you folks want me to cover, and I'd be happy to go out and do the groundwork. My favorite part of freelancing is the research. And lo and behold, that's what I'm doing a lot of right now. So this is a learning, you know, this is a learning curve for me too, the discovery. That's the part I really enjoy. So give me topics to go look for, and I'll go look for them. Like the question about the designer materials. I'm looking forward to finding more details about that.
Okay, well, you heard it all. So if you have any topics that you would like Kathryn to share more info on, please let us know. Find us on Slack, or find Kathryn on Slack, or find me, or email us, and we're going to organize another event soon. Thank you very much for joining today. Thank you, Kathryn, once again, and hope to see you very, very soon.